Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Let's Talk. I'm your host Qamarul, and we'll be talking about today social media, whistleblowing, impact and outcomes. Now, we've seen recently, well, in fact, last month, the allegation that has been brought forward against Facebook and how a former employer, a product manager, has left the company and made several of allegations against Facebook. And of course, Facebook denies those allegations. We'll be talking about it, the impact that Facebook has on our community, on our society. And of course, as we know, more than 7 billion is the population of the world, and over or close to 3 billion people are using Facebook, active users of Facebook. So surely and certainly it has a power. Now, does it need to be regulated? And if so, why does it need to be regulated? What harms social media has or can do, especially to our younger generation? We've seen a lot of news how it impacts the mental health of our youth, our future generation, of our children. And how can we educate and make our viewers aware of the harms that the social media can do, and what are the learnings? What can we do to protect ourselves, our loved ones? Especially, we have seen a lot of incidents that have taken place, including a said death of an MP as well. A lot of hate comments and online abuse we see that are very prevalent in our society. And surely, as a society, we must take a step as well. Now, all of this and many more, we'll be discussing those. And of course, we'll also touch towards the end about the mental health and how it impacts our mental health. And does it only impact our mental health, or can it also impact physically? All of this and many more we'll be discussing in our tonight's program. But before that, let us introduce our three guests who have kindly joined with us virtually. And my first guest for tonight is Mr. Jamal Ahmed, who is a Fellow of Information Privacy. Can you hear us? Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, and thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you very much for giving us your valuable time. Next guest, we've got Mr. Nazim Uddin, who is a political analyst and, of course, frequently our guest on Channel S as well, like our previous guest, Mr. Jamal Ahmed. Mr. Nazim, can you hear us? Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum.
I
can hear you properly, yes.
Thank you very much for giving us your valuable time. Inshallah, we'll come back to you. And our third guest, of course, Mr. Ben Anderson, who is the founder of Feeling Social. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Good evening.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you very much for giving us your valuable time. And I'll be finding out more about what Feeling Social is about and what work do you do and what work does your organization does. And stay tuned with us. I'll be definitely coming back to you. But before that, let's start first with Mr. Jamal Ahmed. I'm sure you've heard the news. Last month, of course, the whistleblower, as we say, a lot of allegation you've seen against the tech giant, Facebook. And of course, a lot of other social media are also not free from such allegations. Now, your thoughts, I'd like to find out from you as an expert in an IT industry. Does social media, do you think it's time that it needs to be regulated?
There are lots of calls from experts, not just in data privacy and data protection, but throughout many different industries, including the mental health sectors, which says social media has to be regulated. And this is something that Ofcom have actually been looking quite closely at, and we can see around the world there are laws being introduced to regulate social media in terms of actually protecting children first. So there has to be a start somewhere. We need to protect the most vulnerable and the most at risk from being exploited through the use of social media. And once we start taking care of the children, then we can have a look at what else we can do to bring in regulation for adults. Now, the problem is when you look at laws, when you look at the English legal system or any legal system, you can see that they're very old, they're very archaic, and it takes a long time to bring any regulation into place. And in Europe, in 2018, we had the GDPR, which came into force, and that took a long time. And one of the things GDPR recognized was the way people use technology, the way people communicate, the way people interact is actually changing. And what we need to do now is to bring in a comprehensive set of laws to protect people when they are sharing personal information and accessing platforms like Facebook digitally. And when GDPR actually first came in, if you look into the early history, you can see Facebook actually faced a large fine for failing to protect people's data privacy. Now, the funny thing here is it took Facebook 8 minutes to make the money to pay that fine. But what they lost on the share price and what they lost in terms of people that used that service was actually a lot more impactful than any penalties they faced through the regulation. So yes, regulation is required. The challenge is when you do bring in regulators, when you have the companies with the resources of Facebook, with the lawyers that they have, they can normally tie these kind of enforcements and regulations up in courts for many, many years.
Now, when it comes to regulation, of course, we know there is, at the moment, discussion going on about the online hate bill. Now, by the time it comes into law, the technology would have gone much more faster ahead. And most of the things that might have been mentioned there could be outdated. So how do we keep up with the pace?
The best way to keep up with the pace is to bring in regulations and bring in legislation which is actually future-proof. And the way to do that is by not being too prescriptive, but by more giving guiding principles and more giving approaches. So as we do, technology changes, as the way we use technology changes, the law remains fit for purpose and appropriate in every context.
Thank you very much for that. I'll come back to you, Mr. Jamal. Now, I'll move on to Mr. Nazim Ahmed. You're a political analyst. Now, you've heard, I'm sure you've seen the news that's happening around the tech giant, especially regarding the Facebook, and how there have been some serious allegations being made. And I have to stress, obviously, Facebook denies all the allegation. Now, how does it impact the political sphere? And what lessons do you think, as a political analyst, do you derive from such allegation that we hear?
If you look at U.S. elections and also the violence that occurred after Trump, after election in the U.S., so it shows you the great power that Facebook has. Especially, it feeds misinformation. The information is not regulated. Number two, it put forward controversial images and false images in many cases. And also, for example, if you look at in Bangladesh and Myanmar, which is Burma, military used it to promote violence against Muslim, Rohingya Muslims. So politically, it can create a huge impact on people, because in many cases, if you look at Facebook always relies on users' freedom to post whatever they wanted to post. But if you look at newspapers, for example, is highly regulated. Anything that is posted on a newspaper, of course, the newspaper is responsible for it. But when it comes to Facebook, they always get away with an excuse that they are simply a platform. But effectively, I think unless there are some editorial control, unless the Facebook takes full ownership of everything that is posted on its platform, I think it can be very dangerous for the society as a whole.
Now, I have to just, a couple of things I need to clarify. Of course, you talked about Myanmar, and we know, and I've read several reports online, including some reliable broadcast news media outlet, that people in Myanmar, most of them in general, they don't know about internet. They know about Facebook. They connect internet via Facebook. So, of course, it's a powerful tool. Now, you've made an allegation regarding misinformation. Just to correct you on there, or you can please throw some lights on it. We have seen in pandemic how people who are trying to promote false information about COVID-19, Facebook have taken a very drastic step to ensure that the users are being fed appropriate information or correct information. We've seen with regards to anti-vaccinations, Facebook have promoted quite rightly towards the right direction. So will you still suggest that everything that is posted on Facebook will be considered to be misinformed?
No, not at all. I did not say all the informations are misinformation. But what I'm saying is that they must have editorial control on what is posted on Facebook. So that's my position.
Excellent.
Let me just come in there and just add to...
Yeah, Jamal bhai, please do come in.
What Brother Nazim has saying. And it's very interesting what he said about politics and Facebook. So if we go back to the election that we saw in the US, we could see that we had the most polarized US elections in history. And one of the main reasons for that was the way social media was being used as a tool to spread misinformation and also to polarize people's views. So one of the things you can do with social media is you can understand what people are interested in, what their personalities are. And by understanding what makes them tick, you can send them specific messages that are going to influence to vote in one way or another way. Now, when it comes to winning elections, there's two ways to win an election. Number one is you get the most people to vote for you. The other one is you stop people from going and voting for your opposition. And what a lot of political parties have been spending a lot of money on Facebook doing is saying, identifying their supporters, seeing what things they care about and sending them targeted messages on those things to make them go and vote for them. And those that they've identified are not their supporters, they spread misinformation and lies about them to dissuade them from going out and voting for their president or their representative of choice. And we know this is a far bigger scandal because even in the UK, we saw with Brexit, we also saw with the company Cambridge Analytica and all the scandal that was involved in that, and how social media is actually being used as a weapon to sway what happens in a democratic state. And that is totally unacceptable. And that needs a lot more regulation. And we can see that people are being misinformed. And this is increasing the amount of people that we see on the far left and the amount of people we see on the far right. And this is directly contributing to the society that is breaking down, and political leaders have no control over that because the leaders, the people who are owning tech organizations like Facebook are making the decisions about who is going to get put into power and how, because they want the advertising revenue, because they want more people to spend time on that. And if you look at the claims and the allegations and the evidence that is coming out from this whistleblowing and the Facebook papers, or whatever the media decided to call them today, you can see that Facebook algorithm is actually promoting hate more, in fact, up to 8 times more than they are promoting other material because it gets them more engagement.
Now, I'll come to that with regards to the revenue that has been generated to adverts. Now, you've mentioned about Brexit there. Just to keep it fair and balanced, a lot of people who have voted Brexit would say they haven't been misinformed. They have been totally, fully informed and voted, not because of what says on Facebook, but because they, according to their understanding, this is what they think is the best way forward. How would you deal with that?
That's a very fair comment. I would say, where is the £300,000 a week that you was meant to save as a result of Brexit? I haven't seen it. How long have we been? How long has it been that we left Europe? What I do see is shortage in ourselves. What I do see is lack of people and lack of labour. What I do see is lack of income for landlords. What I do see is lack of business. All I'm seeing is problems. I'm yet to see one single benefit that we've had from Brexit, other than some people saying, well, now we make our own decisions.
Fair enough. The program, the direction will go towards completely a different angle, but just to balance it out, because we do not have any proper representation from either of the side. So that's why, in order for me to balance, they might say that, of course, the pandemic was never within the plan, and everything that was designed at that time were pre-pandemic, and pandemic COVID-19 could also be a significant factor. But we won't go there at this moment in time, because obviously today's discussion is not that. Let me move on to our third guest, Mr. Ben Anderson. You're the founder of Feeling Social. Talk to us a little bit about Feeling Social. What is this organization?
So my organization looks at the link between mental health and social media. My background, I've spent most of my career within working within social media, within the music industry. And as about 10 years in, I decided to look around because it didn't seem to be having that much of a positive relationship with everyone around me, and I decided to look at the impact that was having on people's mental health. So
when you say impact, give us an example. How does it impact?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in 2021, to have a positive relationship with your own mental health, you also need to have a positive relationship with social media. So when we talk about impact, I mean, specifically within, I work quite a lot with young people. I think in some potential impacts could be relation to addiction and use of social media. It could be on what warped reality or what perfection looks like or feels like, or comparison culture. But even anything from, we've touched on it a little bit about, some of misinformation and the impact that, social media can have on causing anxiety about the news, about the world, about the pandemic, for instance. You know, I think we've all been. I heard an amazing quote the other day, and it was, "You can wear a mask to protect yourself from the physical impact of COVID, but somebody from around the world could sneeze digitally or sneeze on social media by spreading something, and that could impact your mental health and your anxiety around it." And I think that's it's an interesting, when we look at social media and the role it plays. I think, yeah, we certainly, it can. There are several things that can, you know, it can be an amazing tool. We know that it can be an amazing tool, but also it can be quite damaging to those, whether it's young people or the older generations.
No, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say one more thing that I believe is, I think that we need to start listening to young people. They're the digital natives, so those people who've been brought up with digital and social media as part of their life are far more experienced than all of us are sitting here today, than I am with 10 years in the industry. And I think if we can really find a way to learn from them, a lot of my classes are directly with young people or directly with youth practitioners, and talking about how we can create a better world for our young people, or how we can at least provide the foundations where they can solve or help contribute to a lot of the problems that we've created in previous generations. So I think listening to young people around these issues, they have the answers. And certainly if we can empower or make sure that when we have these conversations like we have today, that there is young people or that young people are involved, because I think they have a lot of these solutions, or we can certainly find these solutions with them and with their help.
Now, you've mentioned some interesting points, and of course you have also covered it doesn't affect only children but our older generation. I'll definitely come back to you, because literally I've got 5 minutes before I go to a break. And Jamal, Ahmed, I understand you've got only first segment with us, so I'll take whatever I've got time. I want to ask you some questions before you leave. Now, with regards to, we have heard about how it can cause unrest. We've heard from our guest misinformation, disinformation. Now, as a parent, especially within the society that we live in, community live in, as an IT expert, now, what advice would you have, or would you give us to ensure, because we've heard about the online abuse, we've heard about children going through a lot of trauma or mental health, how can we protect them? What can we do?
So I think the first thing we need to do as parents is to be aware of what engagement your child, or if you're a guardian, what engagement they're having with social media. And one of the things Ben touched on is it can really have a massive impact on somebody's mental health. And I'll tell you a story. So one of my peers, when she was younger, she had body dysmorphia because everywhere she looked, she saw pictures of women who were very thin. Now, that is not the reality. But for somebody who's growing up in COVID, who's not going out there seeing what reality is, the only experience of what people look like is based on, let's say, Instagram or Facebook or some other social media. They have a very warped perception of what reality is, and they have anxiety and mental health issues because they feel like they are not that perfect person or those perfect people they see on Instagram and on social media. And so they would develop what we call eating disorders and habits and things like that. And when this gets really extreme, it can actually lead to people being hospitalized and really facing a lot of hardship in their life, which is completely unnecessary. And as parents, the first thing you need to do is to understand how much screen time your children are having with these platforms, and make sure that these platforms have cookie settings or virtual private networks, so they're not profiling your children, and they're giving them a balanced perspective rather than just really giving them an extreme view of what the world looks like. And that is the problem we have with any social media algorithm, is it looks at what you're looking at, it looks at what you're doing, and it gives you more and more of that, which means that your perception of reality becomes more and more warped as you go down what we like to call the rabbit hole, and you only have this false virtual world of the ideal that people are putting, which is not reality.
Now, you've mentioned about, obviously, in the beginning, the Facebook needs obviously regulated, or big tech needs to be regulated. You've talked about how our parents can do, or what role they can play. Now, a lot of our parents are not IT tech. They're not an expert. They don't even know how to use a computer or a laptop, or perhaps they can do a little bit of maybe mobile phone calling, sending text, that's it. But they don't know how the world of IT works. Now, what can we do to help them ensure that not only they are protected, but the contents that their children view are also, even if it could be lawful or legal, but harmful? What can they do then?
Well, there's actually some really good solutions on the market where you can restrict how much time your child can have on their device connected to the internet. And once that time runs out, unless you as the parent put the password in, they won't have access to that. So I think that's probably one of the first things we can do, is to find a solution. That means even if we're not tech savvy, even if we can't look at what they're doing, what their activities are, we can limit how much exposure they have to that. And I think Ben might actually be better qualified to give an answer to that. So I'm going to bring him in.
Thank you. I mean, the first thing I'd say is that this is the first generation where young people are teaching their older generations. It started off where you're teaching about mobile phones. It's teaching about gender, about equality, about racism, often about the world today and social media. And I think one thing that we can do, even if we're not experts ourselves, is listen and build an open and empowered communication channel. I truly believe that. And I think the problem with restricting our young people, and the problem with, trying to track, and I've had a lot of questions before about how can I track what my young person's doing on Snapchat? You can't. The genie's out of the bottle. And obviously you can do things, but I think young people today can run rings around their parents, because they even if you follow one of their accounts, they've got two more. And if you're playing that constant cat and mouse chase, or even if you're restricting them, they will go somewhere else to receive that content. Or we might create a negative relationship with that content. Now, I think much more what we can do is we can look at their digital resilience. And across the board, even when we look at the real life versus online, I think what we can, schools which focus on a young person's resilience, the young people will perform better across the board. If you can create a healthy relationship with social media, a healthy communication network with yourself and that young person, and you can learn with them, and try and get them to be the teachers, try and get them to show you what good and healthy content looks like. And I really believe that if we can build their hard skills, we'll be doing a much more of a service to them, and it will be much more effective, giving them the tools to navigate this world safely, rather than necessarily try and police those tools. Because essentially they could, Thank
you, Ben. I'll definitely be listening more from you. It's just a short time we've got. We need to go for a break. Jamal bhai, thank you very much. I would love to continue our discussion, but thank you very much once again for giving us your valuable time. I know you're very busy, but once again, thank you very much, Jamal bhai, for giving us your valuable time. And that's Jamal Ahmed, Fellow of Information Privacy. When we come back from break, thank you. When we come back from break, we'll be definitely continue our discussion on this topic, social media, whistleblowing, impact and outcomes. We still have two more guests. We'll be discussing more and exploring the mental health, and at the same time, what political impact does it have on our society. We've heard about Brexit election. We've heard about the American election. We've heard about the Myanmar or other third world countries, how they are influenced by social media. Now, we will be seeing what other solution can we find out from these. Stay tuned with us. We'll be right back in a few moments. Thank you very much. Welcome back. You're watching Let's Talk live on Analyst on Sky 777. We're also live on our social media platforms, especially on Facebook page. And of course, that reminds me, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to all our social media platforms, including our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Of course, this program can also be streamed via our website, chsuk.tv. We're discussing today on Let's Talk social media, whistleblowing, impact and outcomes. We had three guests in the beginning on the first segment. Jamal Ahmed, who is a Fellow of Information Privacy, was with us in the first segment. Due to other engagement, he had to go. However, we still have two other guests, and we have been kind enough to still have with us Mr. Nazim Uddin, who is a political analyst, and of course Ben Anderson, who is the founder of Feeling Social. Now, in the first segment, we have discussed about the social media, the responsibility, the misinformation that are out there, and how can we protect our younger generation or even elderly people when it comes to mental health and how these social media impacts us. We'll continue our discussion, and Nazim Uddin, I'll come to you. with regards to the whistleblowing issue. We have seen clearly that the allegation that have been made that Facebook is putting profit above the welfare of the children. Now, of course, any company, I would assume, will keep profit or will look into their advantage before anything else. What's wrong with that?
I think we have to see it from two angles. First angle is that, every human lives in a society and we have social responsibility. Similarly, every organization needs to respect those responsibilities. We call it corporate social responsibility, yes? That's the first one. The second one is that every person who is signing up to Facebook, they have a moral duty towards us. Our, emotional as well as mental well-being is very important, I think, to every individual. So as a company, of course, the first priority is to make sure that we as a client, we are the client of Facebook, we remain satisfied with them. So, and to make us satisfied, of course, we need a transparent and open relationship so that we can sign up to, a clearly set out transparent terms. When we signed up to Facebook, of course, I signed up in 2007, which was about 2 years after it went public, I think. I did not read the terms and conditions.
Well, no one reads terms and conditions anyway. Even when we sign a bank loan, most of the people don't even read terms and conditions.
So I expect that my data should remain private. But what they are doing now is they are nano-targeting my browsing history. Did they really take my permission exclusively? I'm not sure about that. And number two is that once upon a time, the data used to be aggregated into something so that you cannot target an individual, yes? But nowadays, because of the artificial intelligence, AI, and nano-targeting, and what is happening here is they are sending not only advert, but they're promoting other posts which are feeding my own perception about the world. And the world you perceive, that world is behaviorally important to you.
Now, Nazim, I need to come in there. Now, when it comes to feeding the information, also it depends on our user, because we are all active users of Facebook, especially closing after 3 billion people are active users of Facebook. Now, it all depends, the artificial intelligence you've talked about, it all depends what kind of videos we watch, what kind of posts do we like, what kind of comments do we share, and all of these are fed into the algorithms that then promote. So also the buck doesn't only stop with them, but it also starts with us as well in terms of what we view and what we listen as well.
So I'll just give my own example here, yes?
Okay.
I do not use Facebook that often.
Okay.
Maybe once in a month or maybe once in a week. It varies. I used to look at my friends' post. Nowadays, what happens is that you see 20 other posts before you even come across any post from your friend, yes? I did not ask them to, give me those, 19 posts to me. But why are they feeding it? Not because of my browsing histories. My browsing history is almost limited. I think what is happening is they are trying to hook us to use the platform for longer hours.
So you're talking about addiction there then?
Addiction. They're trying to create an addiction for me. But that has, of course, it's a negative and adverse impact. And the impact is, the more I browse, the more I feel like getting out of Facebook altogether, because I don't feel it relevant to me. And I think that's important. If you look at the history of Facebook, before they took the money from, venture capitalists, Mark Zuckerberg was pushing to the venture capitalists that they would not like to place any advertisement on Facebook. But what you see now is a lot of adverts are feeding in. So effectively, even if Mark Zuckerberg wants, not everything is in his control. If his company is $500 billion company,
it's $800 billion company.
I'm just giving an example to you. And if a company needs to generate an yield of 5%, they need to make certain amount of profit. Otherwise, what will happen is the company's market capitalization go down. So because of the financial pressure, I think, in many cases, they have to do many things. But we, as a user, we see it as an utility for us, utility in the sense that we wanted to contact our friends, we want to have the connections with our friend, and I think that should be treated as that. So if you look at, for example, US congressional hearing, they came to a conclusion that Google, Amazon, and Facebook, all of them are monopolies, yes? So effectively, in nothing in the world, you can see monopoly in a market-driven economy. But we, although we say ourselves that we are a market-driven economy, we still allow these monopolies to control our life. And I think we should create a level playing field so that other providers can come in. So for example, if you look at Instagram and WhatsApp, yes?
They're both of them owned by Facebook.
Yes, they were once upon a time were considered as potential rivals to Facebook. And they were allowed to acquire those companies. What happened to those regulators? Why did they not foresee that one? And the second point, they were then trying to acquire, TikTok. Is it okay? But of course, TikTok could not be acquired. They were trying to also acquire Musical.ly in the past, yes, which is similar to TikTok. I think we must make sure that we do not allow them to acquire similar businesses so that they can remain a monopoly. And I think, so that's number one. Number two, I think what they should do, and especially the UK and other countries should do, is they should treat these kind of social media companies the way that they treat newspapers and television channels.
But this is where the problem comes in, because that's controlled and looked after by Ofcom. Now, we do not have any body that can oversee such editorial policies or content that have been shared. Now, some of the content, or in fact, most of the content can even be legal. But whether they are harmful to our viewers or users, that's another question. Now, I'd like to highlight something. Now, we know about the whistleblower, Frances Haugen. She's mentioned that right now, the only people in the world who are trained to understand what's happening inside of Facebook are people who grew up inside of Facebook. Now, how can we then expect the lawmakers, the policymakers, the politicians to design and come up with a solution that can, you mentioned about level playing field. How can that be possible then?
No, I think, of course, you need to look at three things here. So the people who are working, they know what is happening inside. So input side, they have better knowledge, yes?
Yes.
The second thing is the process side, how the Facebook use their own algorithm. And for example, if you study economics, so consumer behavior is an element to it, yes? And effectively, how they process the human psychology, I think that's the second issue. What we are looking at from the government perspective, we are looking at the outcome side of the equation. We don't care about input and process. As long as the outcome remain compatible with our values, firstly, and which is good for the society as a whole, and which does not feed in misinformation or disinformation, or which doesn't promote violence and terrorism and other matters, I think we will have to create some set criteria that each platform must do more to visibly make sure that their platform is not used for violence, their platform do not share misinformation, that their platform do not feed into the controversial matters that happened. And I think it can feed in many ways. So I think we should.
So when you say we, you're referring to the government.
I beg your pardon?
When you say we, you're referring to the government.
I think if you look at we as a society collectively, and the government represent us. Okay. So I think the government cannot escape that responsibility.
Okay, fair enough. I'll come back to you. And Mr. Anderson, I've got some interesting point that I need to raise with you with regards to Nazim Uddin. He's raised some important factors about addiction and about signing up as a user to Facebook. I'll come back to you. But before that, it's an interactive program. What do you think, my dear viewer? What should it be? What impact does it have in your life? Do you have any personal story that you would like to share and how it has impacted you positively, negatively, whatever it is? You can share. You can see the telephone number on the screen, 0203 523 4111 or 0208 523 4111. Let's see who's our caller for tonight. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, my dear brother, for calling in.
It's interesting. I was watching your discussion, but being realistic and pragmatic about these platforms, basically, we can't say we're the victims. We've given these corporations, multinational corporations, institutions, and governments have done the same, for them to market our personal identities. We've given them that consent.
So when you say we've given them the consent, what do you mean in terms of terms and conditions we've agreed?
Well, yeah, the moment we've subscribed to these platforms, we're sharing all our personal information with them. So we're giving our consent for them to, market everything through us, and we get information back, and we want to promote ourselves, the likes and dislikes. We've jumped onto basically, the market they've created. It was a market that was basically a theory which has now been created, and it's, everybody's realizing what's going on around with regards to, not just with regards to our personal identity, but the amount of fraud. There isn't anybody really. There are regulators out there, there are legislations out there, but nobody's actually doing anything about it. And if you do have a complaint, you're going to struggle to find somebody you can ring up and actually have a conversation like I am having with you.
Yeah, stay on the line. There's an interesting point you've mentioned. Brother Nazim, you've mentioned about, did Facebook or any other tech giants have asked exclusively for our permission? But now we see our viewer is telling that we have signed and agreed to the terms and condition. How would you combat that?
No, I think there are, I don't disagree with the viewer at all. What I said is when I signed up to Facebook, I did not give them a lot of consents, but what perhaps I might have done is I might have given some generic, or I've given them permission to use my data in certain ways. But of course, if you look at the terms and conditions, some of the terms and conditions are too vague, too general, subject to interpretation in many ways. I can only talk about myself. Yes, when we sign up to these Facebooks, we of course expect them to use our data. But in some cases, what they're doing is they're using our data as a currency.
So they're misusing our data.
Yeah, they're using our data as a currency. Instead of taking money from us, they're taking data.
The transaction is done in data.
Yeah, so it's a data currency, I think we would say.
Okay, now coming back to the viewer, what do you think is the solution? If you would have been in charge of Facebook, let's say, what changes would you like to see yourself?
I would say that the governments have regulators. We have Ofcom. It's the age of communication and information. We already have, for the non-internet basically platforms, we have regulators out there. So I don't see, it's like, I find it really strange how we're in this position where we have regulators and legislation where we're actually saying that there isn't anybody that can do anything. It's not like, there isn't anybody out there to regulate them and supervise and manage the information. Everything is done in observance of all these government institutions which are out there. We are living in the age of communication, so I don't understand when somebody says, how is this permissible? It's permissible because governments and institutions are promoting it.
Okay, but we don't have anyone from the government to back that up. So obviously, we don't know whether governments are intentionally promoting or not. But sometimes when it comes to multinational companies, big corporate, big organization, there are a lot of interests out there. And of course, political organization, the other tech companies or other normal companies, we all take advantage of it. So obviously, there are a lot of things that we need to consider. But thank you, my dear viewer, for putting your point through and some important points you have discussed. Now, Mr. Ben Anderson, I'd like to come to you. Now, Mr. Nazim Uddin, he mentioned about every person when they sign up to the social tech or the social media accounts. Now, as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you can be as young as 13 to open any social media account. Now, we know a 13-year-old can't even go to a pub, can't even go to a lot of places, or can't even do a lot of things without consent. Now, first, we are not verifying their age. And number two, how a person at that age would understand what's right and wrong when it comes to online world. And Mr. Nazim, he used the word addiction. Your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. I just want to touch in there, and the topic of consent is really interesting. I mean, firstly, for a young person who is signing up to one of these accounts, like how binding is the consent that they give? But also, as a society, we've got to look at how early we're grooming young people onto these platforms, whether it's a 15-year-old now or a 12-year-old who could have had their whole life documented. At what point, and this is a question I don't necessarily have the answer for, but at what point does consent come into it? At what point did a young person or did a child give their approval, their future approval for their image to be used? And the impact, the unknown that we're sort of putting a young person in through posting them on social media. So yeah, that's the first thing. I think we have a responsibility, not just as a government or as Facebook or another platform, but as a society to look at the impact of how we're using young people's imagery or how we're grooming a young person onto platforms like these without their consent. But also then how, obviously the other question is about how once they've consented at the age of 13, how binding is that? How that argument of saying, well, you've agreed to it as a young person.
But also there's another issue. Now, they're not checking it against any valid ID forms or anything along those lines. Now, it could be a child, could be under the age of 13, but they know in order to bypass the system, all they have to do is change the year.
Absolutely. And young people today, as I mentioned already, they're far more advanced than we are.
Indeed.
It's not a case of going into a bar.
I think we were once there.
ID.
Can we not safely say we were there once?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't think we've ever been there in where they are today. I don't think we've ever led into an unknown of, led a platform and led an industry and an age of social media, being the leaders of growth and on what platforms look for when we're looking at trends and whatnot. We've never been in that situation, I think, as much as that. And I think, again, this is the first time where young people can run rings around us online. They're constantly evolving at a faster rate, like digital natives who were born with technology in the palm of their hands. Imagine the impact that has as you're evolving with that technology. I talk quite a lot about yourselves and maybe people in our generation know the difference between a reality in real life and a reality on a mobile phone. But, for young people and for digital natives, that phone and that technology and that online world is an extension of themselves. And so it's not just a case.
And also,
go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and also the online medium, we have seen people of influence. They've got two different lifestyles. They live a completely opposite lifestyle, most of them, that what has been perceived as normal, what we see on their social accounts, then when they're in their personal capacity, in their personal zone. And a lot of young people at the age of 13, they don't know the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we get into the topic of selves and the different person you are online versus who you are with your friends. There's a Japanese proverb which says you've got three faces. The one you show the world, which is probably social media in this example, the one you show the people you love or the people, your friends, and the one that you don't show anyone. And the issue there is the further apart you are from your online self to your real life self, the bigger the gap there, the more vulnerable a person is. And we're not just talking about young people, we're talking about influencers, we're talking about parents, we're talking about the more vulnerable you are to experiencing mental health issues or self-esteem issues. In that sense, when we're talking about influencers, an influencer who could be projecting a perfect life to their followers, but in reality, it will be very different. And that gap, and the larger that gap, the more at risk, the more at risk our society is, especially our young people, is from developing mental health and self-esteem issues.
Thank you. I'll be finding out more about this mental health and how it impacts. Mr. Nazim Uddin, I'd like to find out from you. You mentioned about data and how the data is being used, and the data are used and transported to different mediums. Now, I remember watching a discussion with Mark Zuckerberg with the Senate, and when he was asked about where he lives, he said, "I don't know." Gives an indication that he is not prepared to share his personal information into the public. However, the data that his organization has, we can see it's easily passed on, according to what you have said, based on what we like, what we share, what type of post we hear. How should this reflect, and how can we make sure that our message gets across to the people who are the authority of Facebook, that they can understand this, that when it comes to your personal matter, you can protect it? What about the wider users that are subscribed to your platform?
Yes, I think it's a very challenging
Briefly, in 30 seconds.
Yes, it's a very challenging act for the government because there has been not a very massive controversies around Facebook, and you cannot simply shut it off. Only 3 countries doesn't have Facebook, yes, and UK as a whole, as a country, we are not big enough to have our own Facebook communities, yes, which can project to the world.
That's
so
right.
What we'll have to do, we will have to take steps, step by step, gradually transit into an environment where Facebook is more regulated.
Thank you.
So,
I'll come back to you. It's just because I'm short in time in this segment. We've been hearing, my dear viewers, social media whistleblowing impact and outcomes. We'll continue our discussion. And in the last segment, I would be interested to find out what solution can we take? What can we do? Even if the government or the Facebook itself are not taking, what can we do personally? Stay tuned with us. We'll be right back in a few moments. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the last segment of Let's Talk. You're watching Let's Talk live on channel on Sky 777. We've been discussing the topic, social media whistleblowing impact and outcome, and we have been kindly joined by 2 guests. In fact, we had 3 guests in the first segment, and after that we had 2 guests, and they're still with us. Virtually they've joined with us. Mr. Nazim Uddin, who is a political analyst, and of course Mr. Ben Anderson, founder, Feeling Social. Now, if you've missed the program, then of course you can watch the repeat program tomorrow at 11. I'll give you the reminder once again towards the end of the program. Now, Mr. Nazim Uddin, I had to apologize once again. I had to interrupt you there because of a break. We were discussing about how Mark, the founder of Facebook, was very careful when it comes to releasing his personal information when asked by the Senate. And when it comes to our private information, as you have mentioned, the data gets transferred across to a lot of other channels, and we get surprised that how come a particular company or organization has access to our data. And you were mentioning some valid points. I'll get back to you, and you can continue from where you left.
Yes, indeed. What I said is that we need to have a transitional approach to regulating Facebook. If you, for example, suddenly shut down the entire site, it will affect many users who use it to connect with their friends and family members. So that's one. But there are 3 countries in the world who doesn't use Facebook. So if they can leave, every country can leave, yes? But what I also mentioned. But
a lot of people would say those 3 countries is democracy being practiced in the way that we understand. That's another question mark and a discussion for another day.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think they control their people in more rigorously than.
That's right. That's right.
In our part of the world, so I think we cannot really shut the Facebook off. So only option we have is regulation, and the regulation, you cannot impose a very high regulation in day one. It will be too expensive and too costly. So that's why any government prefer self-regulation. And self-regulation is not working at the moment. So what we need to do is we need to introduce some hurdle and some also tick box exercises so that they can do self-regulation in more aggressive way. So I think there has to be that transitional way to proceed with that regulation. But I think it has to be regulated. So number one, it's a monopoly. It's capturing our data, and it can do whatever it likes because there is no competition. There is no choice for the consumers. So as a country, the second option that we should do, I think we should promote competition. And the third thing that we should do, I think we should ask them to demerge some of their operation. So, for example, at the moment, Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, they are all under a Meta. They have rebranded themselves as Meta.
Yes, that's correct. They have rebranded, just for our viewers so they understand. The Facebook itself as an app hasn't changed, but the corporate branding has changed.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, like Google has changed into Alphabet, the parent company.
That's right.
So they're trying to put everything under Meta brand.
That's correct. Under that umbrella, Facebook is also part of it.
Yeah, each of the brand will remain standalone brand, but of course, they will be under Meta brand.
The reason is because, obviously, just for our viewers, there is a metaverse, and we're talking about virtual reality, where not only we can, the gamers normally in video games, we see one can talk with another, but they are trying to look into the future world where we can communicate. Concerts can be held, a lot of other activities can be done within that virtual reality. But that we'll discuss in another day. Now, Mr. Anderson, I would like to come back to you. There was this fine line you have mentioned in our first segment break, and I really liked it when you mentioned something, a young person won't get groomed if they have someone to talk to. I'd like my viewers to know your thought process. Why do you say that?
Yeah. So firstly, obviously I want to make sure that I'm being responsible in that, because what I'm trying to say there is that if you have a clear communication channel with a young person, whenever they get into a situation where they might be vulnerable, the chances of them talking to you about it will be a lot higher. In the same way, if they're worried about you confiscating their phone or banning them from social media, they'll be much less likely to talk to you or to bring something up when they are actually at risk. It can be something where one of their friends on the platform say something which is potentially damaging or potentially harmful, or something more serious. And I just believe, and I really do, that if we can open those channels of communication within ourselves and young people, and remove the stigma or remove the fear of a parent or removing their device or take them off a platform, that will often be much more of a deterrent to them raising an issue when they are actually at risk. And what you'll find is they won't want to talk about something where they're at a perceived risk, because the response of a parent taking away or removing them from the platform will be seen as something where you're trying to remove part of their self. There's so many issues we talk about, fear of missing out, of actually what happens when we do remove a young person from a device or from social media, the impact that can have on a young person socially. So there's many different issues which can seem a lot worse than a young person actually communicating when they might be at risk.
Now, does that make sense? Yeah, it does. It does. Now, I'll have to play a devil's advocate here. Now, there's another issue we have: anonymity. Now, under the veil or cloak of anonymity, a lot of people have got profiles that perhaps it does not represent who they are. There's no trace. They could be completely someone that they hurl abuse online. Now, my question to you would be, does word really hurt? It's not the same as you physically attack someone. So why can we not have a bigger and broader shoulder and take it and move on?
So I would argue that often the written words can be perceived in many different ways, often more damaging than if someone says something to you out loud.
Why is that?
Because when you see the written word, it goes straight past all those other barriers that you might have protecting you from someone communicating with you, and it goes straight into your subconscious. And it doesn't just go there; it goes there, and you can see those words, and they'll be there for a much more sustained amount of time. So I would say that the misinterpretation often of text, or actually just the impact of text, of negative text, can be far more greater often than someone saying things out loud. And one other thing about that, I think the authenticity of, I think when we talk about a person typing something, often they don't realize the impact that those words will have. I'm currently releasing a platform called Tannoy at the minute, and I'm very, I'm very passionate about, authenticity online and about the
So when you say
impact
authenticity online, you mean there will be no room for anonymity?
I think I'm not saying. Firstly, I think it's a very important conversation that we should have, because troll culture can be extremely damaging. Firstly, for the people who are, behaving and are trolling people, I worry about their mental health themselves.
And not only that, I have to bring in, when you said about trolling, we have seen what happened in the Euro final, unfortunately. And we have seen how it impacted the players. And the race element was brought again. We thought that's been done and dusted in 70s and 60s. But it looks like we're still in 2021 and we're still today talking about the racial abuse that is hurled. But perhaps it's changed slightly. It's more done online under the cloak of anonymity. Now, how do we deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, and firstly, I've never felt that racism as an issue has been over. Maybe it's not interpersonal racism, so maybe it's not the stuff that people are saying to each other, which is so blatant now, but certainly systemic racism is very much in place. And, and
what about if we say it's a banter?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a situation where we know the impact. We know now that racism itself is not banter. And we know that's. I've seen some stories recently about a cricket player being racially abused.
Yorkshire Cricket Club, that's
banter.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that for me, it doesn't surprise me, but it saddens me, and certainly, I think unfortunately, I deliver classes about the impact of racism on mental health, and unfortunately, we are still in a world where we're still in a country where systemic racism, not just interpersonal, but systemic racism is very much still among us. But just to go back to the anonymity element, I think creating a world where people can hide behind profiles or create several different profiles.
That's right.
It reduces the sort of the accountability online, and I don't think everybody should have to give their their passport or anything like that. But certainly, I think we need to work on more increasing the accountability of how people are communicating, or at least when we look at platforms where this is happening, more should be done to nip that behaviour in the bud, or to respond to that behaviour in a much more timely manner. I've seen people who've been saying things outwardly offensive and racist, and it's been reported, and it's not seen as falling outside the terms and conditions. So I think it's certainly troll culture is an issue. I think how we respond to it. But I think looking at the impact that culture can have on a young person, it might be, it's significant, and often it is the written word which is most damaging, rather than someone speaking directly to someone.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to Mr. Anderson. Now, let's move on. Thank you. Let's move on to a caller. Let's see who's on the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Hello.
Thank you very much. We can hear you loud and clear. Welcome to Let's Talk.
Yeah.
How would you contribute to what you see in today's digital world? Do you have any personal experience that you'd like to share?
Well, no, not really. I'm not that tech savvy, and I don't do social media. I'm looking at your topic is a social media whistleblowing impacts and outcomes. That is not social media, is it? If anything, it's unsocial. It's really sad. Because you see, I'm a child of the 70s and I'm close to 50. I don't know why those of my generation do not keep their offspring from away from. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. And have you noticed you've only had one caller? I wasn't sure if I wanted to call in, but it was getting a bit bland without your people calling in. It seems like people are so oblivious, to this subject. I'm surprised. Had it been any other topic, I'm quite sure you've had more callers. Now, the thing is, this Zuckerberg individual, you've mentioned his name. If his name was Malik Zakaria, I'm quite sure he'd be doing some jail time, and that Facebook, a silly company, would come to an end. But again, you also mentioned politicians. Look, politicians are for sale. Someone some time back said they're a cab for hire. Now,
we can't say for all politicians, just to caveat this out, or not all politicians, let's make it very clear.
No, but my friend, it's not all politicians, but many. Look, my friend, a significant percentage. I'm not saying all politicians. I'm not talking about your Jeremy Corbyn. That's why he'll never be prime minister. Look, the problem here is your politicians. You might have all of these Senate things. It's all a joke. Nobody takes it seriously. They have to look like they're doing something. This social media, I don't know how long it's going to go on for. Have you noticed how this Zuckerberg is so desperate for the next generation to carry on? This is what they do. It's really depressing. It's sad. I mean, it's the devil's playground.
What would you do? Let me ask you this. What would you do? You have children. What would you do to make sure that you protect them? And clearly you've mentioned in the beginning you're not tax savvy. So now if that is the case and you've got children and they're very active online, and these days we've seen in pandemic how they have been very actively learning through online platforms. Now, what would you do to make sure that they are safe?
Probably I'm of your generation. I grew up without it, and I'm still here. I wouldn't have it. I just don't need it.
But you can't say your children can't have it because their whole learning medium is now mostly becoming online now.
Well, look, I'll keep an eye on it, close eye on it, like most parents say, but they never do. Yeah. Do you understand? So
basically monitoring your children, keeping a close eye, making sure what they're up to, and make sure you, as a parent, you're completely always being updated on the welfare of your children. Is that right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's right. See, and have you noticed how when it comes to these moguls, they never do jail time, you see? And as you mentioned with politicians, what it is, they're always lobbying for money. And they will get money. And if Zuckerberg, individuals like Zuckerberg go down, then he'll take down politicians with him because they all seem to know the things about one another that they shouldn't know. So it's going to go on like this for some time. And you mentioned this Meta. What is that? I mean, it's a joke of a name.
Okay.
So it's just carrying on and on and on.
Okay. Thank you. We don't have any. First of all, thank you very much for calling in, and you've mentioned certain points. Thank you very much for your own personal contribution. We don't have any politician on the platform, so that's why it's my responsibility to make sure I caveat it out. You've mentioned previously about Jeremy Corbyn. People who are not supporter of Jeremy Corbyn would say that there are some allegations against him. And with regards to Boris Johnson, you have mentioned there are a lot of people who are support there. He's still very popular. Perhaps rating has dropped slightly because of the recent events. However, he's still the Prime Minister. So there are both ways. Because we don't have a politician here to represent either side, that's why I had to make sure I cover both the sides. Before I move on to my guest, I'll take one more call. Let's move on. Let's see who's next on the line. Assalamu alaikum.
Hello, assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much for calling in. Yes, how would you contribute to our discussion tonight?
Yeah. I like to talk about the social media is a bullying, and in our public place,
Why is it bullying?
Parliament.
Why is it bullying?
School. Sorry?
Why is it bullying? Did anything happen to you personally?
Yeah. No, I'm telling you about the bullying from our lives, from human being. The bullying going away from forever. Just believe one thing, like our religion book, Islam, Quran. Whole world believe that in our Muslim religion, every family have a dad and mom registered. So no bullying. Other religion, some people married, some people non-married.
Okay, I'll have to stop you. I'll have to stop you there. Our discussion is not along those lines. I can understand you're coming from a theological perspective. We're not talking only about Muslims here. Yes, we have our own values and other things. However, we also have to be careful. We live in a wider society, and that's why we have to respect the way other people perhaps see a different way than us. So that's why. Thank you very much. I can understand you've mentioned about the bullying, and I'm thankful to you for calling in. Now, I'll move on to Mr. Nazim Uddin. I'd like to find out from you. We have seen when COVID misinformation, anti-vaccination information were out there on social media, the press, the reporter, the politician pressured the social giants, namely not only Facebook but Twitter and other platforms, and we've seen now there's infodemics and the correct information and any false information are taken down. Similar sort of implication can it not be brought forward when it comes to online abuse, especially when it's done under the cloak of anonymity?
Yes, I think Ben has mentioned about this. that we wanted to police them, and how can?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get to you is if the press, the journalists can pressure the big tech companies and they can mend their ways, surely, as you have mentioned, we create the government and we vote in our government. So clearly we can send the message to the government that let's make sure that we get united on these matters when it comes to online abuse, online hate, Islamophobic hate, anti-Muslim hate, or any other racist comments. Let's get together and make sure that's been eradicated completely.
Yes, I think a firefighting approach to each problem may not be the appropriate solution.
Okay.
I think we need to create a framework first, and within that framework, there must be some ways to regulate. It could be self-regulation, or it could be regulated by a third party or a regulator. And otherwise, what will happen is not every issues will be picked up by mainstream medias. And if mainstream media do not pick it up, this will not be addressed. But what will happen is, as Ben has mentioned, the psychological impact on people who are bullied, we cannot ignore it. Our body runs through natural laws, but there is no psychological law. Every person's consider each abuse in a different way. Some people will be devastated by, an oral statement, and other persons can easily shrug it off. So for that reason, I think we must make sure that there is that, preventative regulation.
Excellent.
So that there is a framework, and within that framework, social media platforms are regulated.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
On mainstream medias, I think we'll only be doing firefighting.
Excellent.
And firefighting is never a good solution.
Some good solution that has come out from you. Mr. Ben Anderson, we literally have got less than 5 minutes. We have seen one of our caller or viewer or caller has particularly mentioned social media. It's not social anymore. It's very unsocial. Now, final thoughts or solution that you would prefer to see a change come about, and perhaps we can move on towards the right direction. As a person who specializes in this field, what would you say?
I'd firstly say that the censorship that we're seeing around COVID-19, I don't think should be seen as a benchmark for a company doing it well. But that's another conversation. What I would say for solutions in terms of this issue about young people and about the impact that social media can have on young people, I think it comes to looking to them for the solution, talking to them. If you want to know how you as a parent or an elder can have a positive impact on a young person or under your care, I would say talk to them about it. If you want to increase a young person's capacity to deal with harm online, or to reduce the impact that social media can have on them, I would say look into digital resilience. Look into increasing a young person's digital resilience. Look into increasing your own. Look at what healthy and nutritional social media looks like. Look at what your digital diet looks like. These are all things that I teach, and I teach to young people and to adults. And also, as a whole, I think look at how we are using social media as an example. And before we start talking about the young people and tracking them, we should also look at our own usage and look at our own behaviours online. Brilliant point
to end with. Mr. Nazim, final thoughts from you in regards to what about curtailing free speech in the name of regulatory? How would you respond?
No, I think I'll broadly address this point. I think I would not prefer shutting off internet, shutting off social media, shutting off free speech. I think they have a lot of benefits to offer. So I think that's number one. Number two is that in the United Kingdom, we have freedom of expression. And I think that's a fundamental value. I think that should never be sacrificed.
And should always be upheld, is that what you're saying?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, excellent. Go on.
And I think I would just like to say on that point, I think, I believe in that as well, and I believe in the right of people to express their opinions. And I think what we're seeing from social media platforms right now is it's not just about spreading misinformation. It's about what I'm seeing is people being censored in expressing their opinions or asking for clarification as well. It's really,
Thank you. Thank you, my dear viewer. That's it. That's all we have time for. I'd like to thank Mr. Nazim, Uddin, who is a political analyst, and Mr. Ben Anderson, founder of Feeling Social, both of you. Thank you very much for your valuable time. Of course, in the first segment, Mr. Jamal Ahmed, fellow of Information Privacy. I thank all three of them to be giving us their valuable time and participating in this conversation or in this program. Also, my thanks to our viewers who have watched the program, especially our callers who have called into the program. An apology for not taking or for not being able to take all the phone calls. You can watch the repeat of this program tomorrow at 11. However, we can conclude, as Mr. Ben Anderson have said, that we should be looking after our children, but at the same time, as an adult, what we are doing, how much we are using, that also needs to be looked into. And Mr. Nizamuddin also clearly mentioned that we're not for shutting down the social media. It's a powerful tool. We have to engage and use it in a way that is beneficial not only to the society, but also to the community. And finally, I'd like to end, no racism is allowed, not only verbally, physically, but also online. That's all. Next time, we'll see you again in another program. Until next time, thank you very much, and we shall see you soon. Wassalamu alaikum.